Can the child within my heart rise above? Can I sail through the changing ocean tides? Can I handle the seasons of my life?
Well, I've been afraid of changing, 'cause I've built my life around you. But time makes you bolder, even children get older, and I'm getting older too. Well, I've been afraid of changing, 'cause I've built my life around you. But time makes you bolder, even children get older, and I'm getting older too. Oh, I'm getting older too. Oh, take my love and take it down.
Oh,
Climb a mountain and turn around. And if you see my reflection in the snow-covered hills, well, the landslide will bring you down. And if you see my reflection in the snow, well, the landslide will bring you down. Oh, the landslide will bring you down.
I'm not crying, you're crying. Moms, we love you and we celebrate and honor you today. We're just really glad that you tune in and join with us. And we're really thankful for you. Hey, you may not know this, but as a church, every single year on Mother's Day, we look for a way to bless moms in our community. We look for a way to just give a gift away. And this year we partnered with Young Lives. You've heard us talk about them before. They're a ministry that supports teenage moms right here in the Valley. And one of the most important things that they do, one of the most crucial things they do all year is camp. And we sent, as a church, we sent 8 girls to camp last year. And it's so vital that this year we came to them and said, we don't want any girl to miss it. So we want every single girl that wants to go. We want to send every one of them. And they've had to pivot and they've had to change because of coronavirus. And so camp's gonna look much differently this year. But because of that change and because of your incredible generosity, like we got the permission to share that there's 2 girls that because of those 2 things, they're gonna get to go. Lexi and her son are gonna get to go. Esther and her daughter are gonna get to go because of the change and because of your generosity. So it's pretty incredible. The things that we as a church get to be a part of and the impact that God makes in and through each and every one of us. Well, it's going to be a great service that we've got lined up. But let me tell you about something before that. All month, we are focusing on marriage. We're calling it May is for Marriage. And we have some great things that we're bringing you. This past Friday night, if you missed it, we had a great conversation between Joel, Jen, his wife, and Midge, who's a counselor that attends here. And they talked about developing intimacy in your marriage. If you missed that, just go to our website and click the May is for Marriage button. and you'll get it all caught up. This Friday, we're really excited about something different that we're gonna bring to you. You may know Ted Cunningham. He's one of our favorites. We love when he comes here and speaks. Well, he and Joel are gonna have a live conversation talking about developing joy and fun in your marriage. You're not gonna wanna miss that. It's gonna be on Friday night, 8 o'clock. Make sure you tune in. It'll be across all of our channels. Make sure you watch that. It's gonna be a lot of fun, and we hope encouraging for you and your marriage. Well, before we continue on in the service, if you would take just a moment. See, every single week we hear from people who they found mission because you shared it. You took just a second and shared it. So you really don't know the type of impact that you clicking one button is gonna have. So take just a second as we get ready to sing some more songs. Take a second to click that share button and invite other people to join you as you're watching this. Well, if you're comfortable doing this, why don't you stand up? We got some songs that we're gonna sing, and then Joel's gonna preach here in just a little bit. So stand up wherever you are and sing along with us.
Just one word, you calm the storm that surrounds me. Just one word, the darkness has to retreat. Just one touch, I feel the presence of heaven. Oh, just one touch, my eyes were open to see. My heart can't help but believe. Come on! There's nothing that our God can't do. There's not a mountain that He can't move. Oh, praise the name that makes a way. There's nothing that our God can't do. Oh. Just one word, you hear what's broken inside me. Just one word, and you revive every dream. Just one touch, oh, I feel the power of heaven. Just one touch, my eyes were open to see. My heart can't help but believe. Yes, there's nothing that our God can't do. There's not a mountain that He can't move. Oh, praise the name that makes a way. There's nothing that our God can't do. Oh, I know there's nothing that our God can't do. There's not a prison wall He can't break through. Oh, praise the name that makes a way. There's nothing that our God can't do. Oh, I will believe for greater things. There's no power like the power of Jesus. Let faith arise, let all agree. There's no power like the power of Jesus. I will believe for greater things. There's no power like the power of Jesus. Let faith arise, let all agree. There's no power like the power of Jesus. Yeah, I will believe for greater things. There's no power like the power of Jesus. Oh, let faith arise, let all agree. There's no power like His power. There's nothing that our God can't do. There's not a mountain that He can't move. Oh, praise the name
Your grace is alive in me. I'm caught in the overflow of mercy that won't let go. Here on this holy ground, standing before you now, Jesus, you are more than enough. If there's one thing I know, it's how you love me so. Jesus, you are more than enough for me. Finally, my eyes can see. You've never abandoned me. I'm held by the kindness of a Father who won't give up. My Father, you'll never give up. Here on this holy ground, standing before you now, Jesus, you are more than enough. If there's one thing I know, it's how you love me so. Jesus, you are more than enough. Forever strong, forever faithful. All my life, you are enough for me. In every storm, in every battle, all my life, you are enough for me. Let's sing that again. Forever strong, forever faithful, all my life, you are enough for me. In every storm, in every battle, all my life, you are enough for me. Here on this holy ground, standing before you now, Jesus, you are more than enough. If there's one thing I know, it's how you love me so. Jesus, you are more than enough. Here on this holy ground, standing before you now, Jesus, you are more than enough. If there's one thing I know, it's how you love me so. Jesus, you are more,
the chasm that lay between us, how high the mountain I could not climb. In desperation, I turned to heaven and spoke your name into the night. Then through the darkness, your loving kindness tore through the shadows of my soul. The work is finished, the end is written. Jesus Christ, my living hope. Who could imagine so great a mercy? What heart could fathom such boundless grace? The God of ages stepped down from glory to wear my sin and bear my shame. The cross has spoken, I am forgiven. The King of Kings calls me his own. Beautiful Savior, I am yours forever. Jesus Christ, my living hope. Hallelujah, praise the one who set me free. Hallelujah, death has lost its grip on me. You have broken every chain. There's salvation in your name, Jesus Christ, my living hope. Hallelujah, praise the one who set me free. Hallelujah, death has lost its grip on me. You have broken every chain. There's salvation in your name, Jesus Christ, my living hope. Then came the morning that sealed the promise. Your buried body began to breathe out of the silence. The roaring lion declared the grave has no claim on me. Amen. Then came the morning that sealed the promise. Oh, your buried body began to breathe out of the silence. The roaring lion declared the grave has no claim on me, no claim, 'cause Jesus, yours is the victory. Hallelujah, praise the one who set me free. Hallelujah, death has lost its grip on me. You have broken every chain. There's salvation in your name, Jesus Christ, my living hope. Hallelujah, praise the one who set me free. Hallelujah, death has lost its grip on me. You have broken every chain. There's salvation in your name, Jesus Christ, my living hope. Jesus Christ, my living hope. My God, you are my living hope.
So good. I don't think I'll ever tire of singing that song, whether we're all together or we're gathered digitally. It's such a powerful reminder today that regardless of what's happening around us in the world, regardless of what seems like is going on, we know that through the death and resurrection of Jesus, that both sin and death were conquered on our behalf.
and that we have a living hope, a living, breathing hope in the person of Jesus, who's already conquered all of the battles that there are to fight. He's already conquered all the illnesses. He's already conquered all of the destruction and difficulty we could ever face by giving us a living hope for ourselves, that one day, regardless of what happens in this life, we gain new life and everlasting life in him. I want to invite you again this week. If you haven't been with us, we've been praying on our knees. And I'd just love for you to join me wherever you are, your living room or in your kitchen or on your patio. I just want to pray again today and ask God's help and healing. God, today we do what the ancients reminded us that you called us to do. When you said that if my people who sing songs to me, my people who read my word, my people who try to follow my way, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray, I will hear them. If they'll turn from their way and they'll turn my way, I'll hear them and I'll heal them and I'll help them. So God, that's why on a regular basis, we just get on our knees. We come before you and we ask for your healing, for your help. We know that when we pray today, when we get on our knees and we turn our eyes towards you, when we send our thoughts and our requests towards you, that you see us and you hear us. God, today I just ask again for your leading, your wisdom for those who are leading us nationally and locally. Give the wisdom and the courage to do what's right for our nation, to lead us through the midst of this epidemic. God, I pray for those who are on the front line. We pray for each and every week. God, I pray first for your provision for them, that they would have all the resources that they would need. They'd have all the people resources, all the medical resources, everything that they need to serve the people who are hurting and that are sick, whether it be with this virus or something else, that they would have all the resources they need. Would you provide for them? And then, God, I ask for your protection for them. Your protection for them physically and emotionally, your protection for their families, for their loved ones. God, protect them as they run towards the fire, as they show up for people who need their help, but also represent danger in their lives. God, I just pray you'd protect them. And then God, today, I just pray you'd be near to our very family. I pray that you would be near to them in what is unthinkable injustice and difficulty. I don't know that there's much more in our world that could demonstrate our deep need of you today, and the brokenness and the difficulty and the division and the social divide and hurting place our nation is in, not just physically or economically, but socially and spiritually. God, I pray you would show up for us, that you'd intervene in a powerful way nationally, but very personally for this family today who's grieving and hurting because of this difficulty and injustice. Be near to them today. God, we just ask that you would help us in this season, that you would heal us, that you would lead us, and that we would be keen to listen to your voice and follow your lead. And I pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Well, thanks for praying with us and singing with us again today. I need some help from you. I need some help so that I can make good on a promise that I made. I know that's never the way to do it. I make a promise and then I ask for your help, but I felt like you were good for it. So I need you to back me up on something. Our local government, our mayor came to us and basically said, hey, look, our local food pantries and local food banks are in massive need, and we need your help. In fact, they asked us to help lead the way with a whole bunch of other churches in providing resources for our local food bank and our local food pantries. And so here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna sort of lead the way in this with the partners of churches that we work with, but this is a community-wide event. In fact, this is gonna be promoted throughout our community, so your friends can participate in this, anybody can participate in this. Mission's just gonna be one site of many sites, and the community food drive is happening next weekend, May 15th, 16th, and 17th. As I told you last week, the needs are increasing in our community, and this is the time, is an opportunity for us to shine. and to be the love of Jesus in our community. So I would just love to overwhelm them. And here's how you can participate. Just look on any of our social media channels for the non-perishable food items that you can bring. And then next weekend on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, May 15th, 16th, and 17th, we're gonna be here from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. And we'd love to see your face. We'd love to smile at you through our masks and wave at you. And we just want your participation. We would love for you to partner with us in helping sort of to overwhelm our community food banks and food pantries here in the East Valley to help them as they're serving people who are going through really difficult times. So if you're able to do that, we'd love for you to help us. If you're not on social media, I get that question all the time. What if I'm not on social media? If you just go to helperaz.org and say, hey, I want to help, click on the I want to help button, and then let us know in there, hey, I want to help with the food drive. We'll send you a list of the non-perishable food items. I would be grateful for your partnership as we partner with our city, which I think is just amazing that they're looking to us, looking to the church to show up for our community in this season. I couldn't be more proud, and it's because of the way you've stepped up in the past that they're looking to us again now. So thanks so much for that. And as I'm saying thanks, I just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. Your generosity has been humbling. It's been humbling for us. As you've believed in us, as you've trusted us, as we've gone out to serve not just our local church and try to meet all the needs in our local church, but in our local community, you have been with us every step of the way. And your generosity is making massive difference in our world. So I just want to say thank you to you, for those of you who are giving sacrificially and generously because you can. For those of you who are in need, I'm not asking anything extra of you, but I just wanted you to know you guys are making a difference. So let's continue to give out of a spirit of worship to a God who is generous to us. Our generosity in this season is reflecting his generosity to us and to the world around us, and we're getting to share that with other people. So thank you so much for continuing to support our efforts through your giving. Let's give it this time.
Praise the one who set me free. Hallelujah. Death has lost its grip on me. You have broken every chain. There's salvation in your name, Jesus Christ, my living hope. Hallelujah. Praise the one who set me free. Hallelujah. Death has lost its grip on me. You have broken every chain. There's salvation in your name, Jesus Christ, my living hope.
Well, last week we kicked off a brand new series called Rebooting Life. If you weren't with us, I'm gonna try and catch you up real quick. But if you were here, you remember I started with a story about working on something really important on my computer and it just shutting down. And when I turned it back on, I got what I call the spinning wheel of death. And I saw this thing, and whenever you get this thing, you want it to go fast, but it was not going fast. In a few seconds turned into a few minutes to many minutes to almost an hour. And then I phoned a friend for some help. But while this was happening, I had this moment of like freaking out, like I'm not gonna get back what I lost. Well, as fate would have it, and I don't even really believe in fate, but as fate would have it, this week, I was working on this message for this week. And Tuesday, shut my computer down. And Wednesday morning, when I opened my computer back up, I was just making some edits on this message. I opened my computer up, it didn't come on. I normally just shut it down, it goes to sleep. And then when I open it back up, it turns back on, but my computer didn't turn on. So I pressed the power button and I realized my computer had shut down. And it starts booting up. And they don't have this spinning wheel of death on there anymore, thankfully, as it's booting up. But my computer's booting up. I get the Apple symbol and it's coming up. And as it's coming up, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I was working on making some significant changes to my message for this weekend. I wonder if it was saved. And lo and behold, when my computer booted back up, I got this. My Word document literally said, Rebooting Life number 2, that's the message for today, recovered. So because of that, we have a sermon day. Otherwise, it would have been a really short service. So we're gonna get to press on. But what we talked about last week, and this is sort of the question of the day, is what should be recovered? I mean, and here's what I want you to know: as we're rebooting life economically and socially, the reality is it's probably gonna look like this for a little while. This spinning wheel is probably the way it's gonna feel. And I know that's sort of annoying, and for some of you, it makes you anxious. And for some of you, it makes you anxious because you're not ready to sort of restart and reboot the life the way it was. And others of you are so anxious to get it going. But the reality is we're all gonna deal with this for a little bit. And I saw an opportunity in this. I thought while we're strategizing about rebooting physically and economically our culture, what about rebooting personally? And I thought there's a way we can reboot in a healthier way. We can reboot our personal lives on a healthier operating system. And we started this with this question last week: what kind of personal recovery should we make? We all are gonna make some sort of recovery financially, and some sort of recovery physically, and some sort of recovery economically and socially, but what kind of personal recovery should we make? What kind of personal changes are necessary in our lives? And we talked a lot about the ins and outs of this, because one of the things we said was not everything that can be recovered should be recovered. And last week, I started us out with this chart, and this is something that I started using personally, and then we started using organizationally, and the truth is some version of this, your businesses, our schools, our local government is using, and the reality is we're all gonna look back and we're gonna reflect as we move forward, and we're gonna try to take things from this season that were helpful along with us. And so I just sort of developed a grid, and last week, sort of your takeaway, your homework, if you will, was to begin sort of taking a moral inventory of your own personal life. And this chart's really simple. If you weren't with us last week, basically during this COVID-19 season, some things have happened. And during this season, there's some positive things that have happened, and there's some negative things that have happened. And before this season, though, there were positive and negative things in our life as well. And we just said that the things that were positive before, those are the things we want to recover personally. We want to recover those things socially and relationally and financially as well. But the things that were negative, we want to figure out how to leave those things behind. We don't want to go back to those things. Not everything that can be recovered should be recovered. There's certain things about our lives and our schedules and our patterns of behavior that we really should leave behind, that this season has revealed clarity around. And during this season as well, there's been some positive outcomes. It hasn't all been negative. You've developed some new patterns. You've discovered some new things. You've had clarity about things that were not as healthy before, and you've made some changes during this season. And those are things we want to carry forward. And then there are things that have happened this season that have been difficult, that have been hard personally. They've been hard emotionally. For some of us, they've been hard spiritually. And those are things we need to figure out how to recover from. And as it turns out, knowing what can be recovered is far easier than knowing what should be recovered. So we sort of took this inventory. And today, here's what I want to do. I want to focus on these two things. I want to focus on what we should leave behind and what we should carry forward. And today, in the message and through this ancient story we're gonna look at in a couple of minutes, we're gonna discover a powerful practice, a powerful principle and a powerful practice that you and I can engage in that will help us to know not only how to leave things behind and how to carry things forward, but even what things we should leave behind and what things we should carry forward. We have to go all the way back to the beginning of God's people. And if you're not familiar with the story, I'm just gonna give you a quick overview. If you have a Bible though, I'd love for you to turn to Joshua chapter 4. If you have a Bible or on your device, and as you're turning there and looking that up, I wanna give you just a quick bit of history. The people of God were in slavery. The Israelites were in slavery in Egypt. And God made a promise to him. He said, I'm gonna deliver you out of Egypt. And you remember he chose Moses, who was an unlikely character. And he said, I want you to go to Pharaoh and I want you to get my people out of Egypt. And so he did that. And through a series of plagues, the final which was this Passover where the angel passed over judgment over God's people, the ones who put the blood of a ram or goat over their door. And he passed his judgment over, and finally Pharaoh was fed up. He said, get out, like I'm ready to let the Israelites go. He was reluctant before, but now he's like, you can go. And so the Israelites, if we were to track their journey, and by the way, yes, this is sort of a kid's version of it, but sometimes the most simplistic versions are the best ones. The people of God left the land of Egypt. And they crossed the Red Sea, famous story where God delivered them from the Egyptian army as they crossed the Red Sea. They went to Mount Sinai, which is where the 10 Commandments came from. And then a whole bunch of events happened. Much of the Old Testament is them wandering. And they sort of did circles. And they sort of came up on the edge of this land that God had promised them to. That's where they were journeying to. This promised land, it was called Canaan. And they came up on the edge of it. It's not represented on this map, but a few of them went in to check it out. Joshua was one of them. We're gonna get to look at him in just a second, so remember that. Joshua was one of them, and when Joshua saw the land, even when he saw the giants in the land, he said, surely God has given us this land. But the other spies were like, no, the people are too big, it's too dangerous. So God's people sort of looped back around and they were like, we're not ready. And they came up to the edge of the promised land one more time. And then they kind of retreated again. They came up, and today where we're gonna pick up the story, they're sort of coming right up on the edge of the Jordan River. And they're getting ready to cross. Moses, though, their leader, is about to die. And he's about to pass the torch to Joshua, who's gonna become the leader of the nation of Israel. And as he passes the torch, God gives some instructions specifically to Moses and to Joshua about what's to happen next. And so this is where we're gonna pick up the story. If you have your Bible, Joshua chapter 4, this is how it begins, very, very first verse. It says, when all the people had crossed the Jordan, so they came up and the part of the Israelites, the priests of the Israelite people, they were holding the Ark of the Covenant that represented God's presence on these poles. And they stepped into the water, and God parted the waters like he had done in the Red Sea. 20 miles up river, he was holding up the water, and on dry ground, the Israelites walked through. And when all the people had crossed the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, he said, now here's what I want you to do. I want you to choose 12 men, one from each tribe. Tell them, take 12 stones from the very place where the priests are standing in the middle of the Jordan River. So you've crossed, but I want you to go back to the middle of the Jordan River, right where the priests are standing with the ark that represent God's presence that's holding back the waters so you could walk across into the land of Canaan, the promised land, on dry ground. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to carry them out and pile them up at the place where you will camp tonight. So I want you to take them out, and then you're gonna keep walking and you're gonna camp somewhere. And when you camp there, I want you to pile those up. So Joshua called together the 12 men he had chosen, one from each of the 12 tribes of Israel, representing all of the people of God. And he told them this. He said, go into the middle, just as God had said to him, go into the middle of the Jordan, right in front of the ark of the Lord your God. I want it to be right in front of God's presence. And here's what each of you need to do. Each of you must pick up one stone and carry it on your shoulder. 12 stones in all, one for each of the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, some of you've sort of seen pictures of this before. This may sound strange to you, but it's not all that strange. In fact, this is an ancient practice that we've imported into our culture today. Anybody know what this is called real quick? This thing right here? If you know really quick, would you just post it in the Facebook chat? Somebody who's on there that's moderating for Mission, we're gonna give a prize to the person who first posts what these things are called. These rocks that are stacked up here. These rocks. I was first introduced to this idea when I started hiking several years ago, more seriously. And if you don't know what this is called, I'm sure it's already in the chat by now. Hopefully it already is, because I'm about to give it away. These things are called cairns or Karens. And some of you are gonna try to correct me, and some of you are arguing with me because some of you call these ducks because you're from California and everything's different in California. But the truth is in America, when it comes to hiking and comes to trails, there was a guy named Waldron Bates back in the 1800s. And he was the first one that sort of came up with this idea of stacking stones, and this is so interesting, to mark a path for hikers to significant monuments, to significant destinations. So this stacking of rocks became a pattern. It became a habit. And you can go throughout the country and national parks all over the place, and you'll see these rocks stacked up that mark a path. As you get to one, you see the next stack of rocks, and you know where to go if you don't know exactly where the path goes. It sort of marks the path. But this stacking of stones was not a new idea. This was a sort of a twist or a version on a really ancient old idea. It started way back in ancient times, and a great illustration of it was when the people were crossing the Jordan River. They grabbed a rock like this, and Joshua said, this is what God's instructed us to do, and I want you to take this rock, I want you to put it on your shoulder, and I want you to carry it out of the Jordan River. We're gonna take it to the place where we're gonna camp tonight. And when we camp there, we're gonna stack them up as a monument, as a memorial to what God did for us. But there's a lesser known part of the story. Some of you have heard that part. We're gonna come back to that in a second, but there's a lesser known part of the story. In Joshua, if we go on, in fact, verse 9 of Joshua chapter 4, Joshua also set up another pile of 12 stones. So 12 stones were taken out of the river by one of each of the representatives of each of the 12 tribes of Israel, taken out of the river. And then Joshua also set up another pile of 12 stones in the middle of the Jordan, at the place where the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant were standing. My guess is you've never heard a sermon on the 12 stones that were left in the middle of the river. This is a curious idea, but Joshua wanted us to know that those stones were there to this day, to the day when the people who he was writing to, this sort of at the end of his life, the history of his life, when he was writing this, he said, those stones are still in there. They're still in the basin and underneath the Jordan River. And this was important because he was basically saying, hey, there were 12 stones that we took out, but there was a stack of 12 stones that represented something that stayed in the middle of the Jordan River. Now, in order to cover the ground we need to cover, I need to start making a list because there's several things we're gonna come back to. So I wanna make a list of important things in here, and then I wanna explain them when we get to the end because I don't want any of us to be lost. So there were 12 stones, and if you're taking notes, this is a great way to take notes. If you're taking notes on reading the Bible, this is something I do often, is I'll write down things that seem important, and then I'll try to discover what the meaning of these things were. So there were 12 stones that were taken out of the river. There were 12 stones that were left in the river. And then we're gonna come back to this in a minute, but the Jordan River itself is an interesting place, and it's an interesting idea in terms of what we learn from that. So we're gonna come back to those in just a second, but I just wanted to start a list of things that are critical to our understanding of what's happening in this story. It goes on, it says that the priests who were carrying the Ark of the Covenant stood in the middle of the river until the Lord's commands that he had given to Moses that Moses had passed along to Joshua were carried out. So God, even before Joshua became the leader, he had given some instructions to Moses that were passed on to Joshua. And then God gave some instructions specifically to Joshua. And after all of that had been carried through, after Joshua was completely obedient with all that God had instructed him to do, the people, the men that were standing in the middle of the ark, they walked out. Meanwhile, the people hurried across the riverbed. Of course they did. All the people were trying to get through. If you walked up on a river and you all of a sudden saw it stop because some people were standing in the middle of it and you were walking by through on dry ground and the river's a mile wide, you'd hurry across too. But they hurried across, and when everyone was safely on the other side, the priests crossed over with the ark of the Lord as well, as the people watched. And this is important. As the people watched, The presence of God that represented their deliverance and their rescue and their safe passage across the river as they watched them come walk out. And that day, we're told, the Lord made Joshua a great leader in the eyes of all the Israelites. And for the rest of his life, they revered him as much as they had revered Moses. This is so important. This is important too. To this point, they didn't see Joshua as the real leader of the people of God. But there was this passage from Moses to Joshua, and it represented something really important. And that day, in the eyes of all the people of Israel, they began to see Joshua as their leader, as the leader that represented God's leadership for them. The Lord had said to Joshua, command the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant to come up out of the riverbed. So Joshua gave the command, and as they came up out of the riverbed, as soon as the priests who were carrying the Ark came up out of the riverbed, and their feet were on high ground, the waters of the Jordan returned and overflowed its banks as before. All the water came rushing down, filled the banks where all the people had walked through on dry ground, and the people crossed the Jordan. Gives us a date. He wants us to know the time and place, and this is important. The people crossed the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, and then they camped at Gilgal, just east of Jericho. So two other important things that we're gonna have to come back to is this idea of this 10th day. This isn't just random idea. He includes this on purpose of the first month, and then the fact that they camped at Gilgal, which is where they made this monument to God. So there are just several things we got to work through real quick as we work through this. And here's what you need to know. It was at Gilgal, and I just told you this a minute ago. It's at Gilgal where Joshua piled up the 12 stones taken from the Jordan River. So here's where I want to start. I want to start first with these 12 stones that were left inside the Jordan River. What's the meaning of these 12 stones left in the Jordan River? Well, typology is a really important thing in the scriptures. As a matter of fact, in the ancient Hebrew scriptures, most of the way people gained belief and understanding was through typology, was through patterns, it was through symbols. And it's a stark contrast in the New Testament because a lot of the New Testament was written by the Apostle Paul to the Greeks. And the Greeks learned in a totally different way. In fact, it's more similar to the way a lot of us learn. It's through rationale. They began to believe and gain understanding about God and about Jesus through rational thought, through logic, and that's how they began to understand. But the Hebrews were completely different. They learned through symbols and specifically through patterns. As there were patterns over and over and over of what God was doing in their midst and what God was up to and that represented who God was, they began to learn about God. And these 12 stones that remained in the Jordan River represented something important. They represented something they were leaving behind. So here's the question. The question is, what were they leaving behind? What was it specifically that they were leaving behind? Now, to understand that, there's another symbol, water. Water throughout the Old Testament and throughout the Hebrew scriptures represented God's judgment. And there's all sorts of examples of this. There was the flood. There was the Egyptians, as we said a minute ago, who were drowned in the Red Sea, who were defiant of God and were not obedient to let God's people go. Jonah, some of you remember the story of Jonah and the whale and him going down the depths as he was running away from God. Jonah experienced God's judgment under the waters in the belly of the whale. In the New Testament, there's symbolisms carried on specifically in the Gospels that were written, many of them primarily to Jewish people. The baptism, the idea of baptism that John the Baptist brought forward, this idea of being baptized, going down into the waters that represented our death and burial with Jesus and being raised to a newness of life was a symbol of this. When Jesus called his first followers, he said, come follow me. And what does he say? I'll make you fishers of men. This was a symbol of, I'm gonna rescue people out of judgment. I'm gonna rescue them out of the waters. I'm gonna raise them to a newness of life. And in the Hebrew scriptures, water meant judgment. And so this water, these stones that were buried in there, something was being judged. And this is important because this was the Jordan River. And if you don't know this, Jordan literally means goat. And there's another little offshoot river of the Jordan called Pippin. I made all that up, but in case somebody wanted to argue the debate, Jordan is the GOAT of all time, just in case you're following along with The Last Dance. I made that up. Jordan, here's what Jordan actually means. Jordan is two words put together, Yardan. And Yardan means to spread judgment. It's Yar means spread and Don means judge. And so what we learn from this, and specifically the Jordan River, all of this is orchestrated by God on purpose. That God was holding back the spreading of his judgment on this next generation of Israelites. The previous generation, they wandered for 40 years in the desert along with Moses. And because of their unwillingness to follow God and trust him and believe that he could lead them in and deliver them from the giants that were in the land, they remained in the wilderness. And which leads me specifically to Moses and Joshua. In fact, names are an important typology in the Old Testament. And one of the things about names is they were symbolic as well. And Moses' name was connected to the law. And when they thought about Moses, they thought about the law. In fact, they regarded the law as the law of Moses. Even though it was given by God, it was regarded as the law of Moses. And Joshua's name literally meant God is salvation. And so these people are moving from leadership under Moses to leadership under Joshua. And instead of putting their confidence in the law and their ability to follow the law, because they try to manipulate God, going, hey, we're doing everything you're asking us. Why won't you do what we're asking of you? Instead of trusting that God had their best interest at heart. And this is an illustration, a representation of movement from trusting in themselves and trusting in the law, which is something God never meant for them to do in the beginning, to a trusting in God as their salvation, which is what Joshua's name means. They weren't leaving the law behind. They were leaving behind their lack of trust. All of those, from all of the 12 tribes that were left behind, the rocks in the middle of the river represented all people from all the 12 tribes that never made it into the promised land, that remained in the desert, remained in the wilderness. And as the waters closed up behind them, there was no going back. It was like a burning of the ships. It was like Joshua saying, we can't ever go back. And this symbol in the middle of the river, even though nobody can see it, it's buried in the river. This represents a mindset. It represents a lack of faith that we can never go back to. And we must go forward, and things must change. Things have to be different, which leads me to the next set of stones. We've covered the 12 stones in the Jordan River, Moses, but these 12 stones that were taken out and they were carried down to Gilgal. This was really important because as these 12 men, one from each tribe, grabbed these rocks and they carried them towards Gilgal. The reality was they took them to this place, and when they stopped there, they were instructed to build a monument when they got there. And so they got to Gilgal and they began to set up these rocks. And this was important. They had carried these rocks a long way. What you need to know is that the Jordan River was a mile wide, so they carried them a half mile out. But the place where we believe they camped that night is just east and a little north of where Jericho is. It's about 8 miles from where they crossed the Jordan River. So for 8.5 miles, these men carried these rocks that were not light. They carried these rocks. These men that were chosen, they carried these rocks across the rest of the Jordan River, through the desert, and they carried them. Somebody pray that I don't drop one of these on my toe, because I don't need a broken toe today. They carried these rocks with them, and they got to Gilgal. Uh-oh. Can we make this stay? Look at that. They got to Gilgal. And they stacked them up. And Joshua said, look, we're doing this for a reason. This represents something. This is a memorial. This is a monument that means something. And it represents a new faith, a new group of people, a new way of following God. And this is what's extraordinary. This is sort of, as they got there to Gilgal, which by the way, wasn't actually a city before. It actually represented a circle of stones. There was a circle of stones that were stacked up. And if you were to go to this region today, there's places all around there where there's these monuments that represent things that were significant in people's lives. This was an ancient cultural tradition, but this particular monument represented something really important, and it represented God's deliverance for them and God's rescuing of his people. And after they had gotten done building this monument, Joshua, this is what Joshua said to the people. He said, listen, he said out to all the Israelites, in the future, your children will ask you, what do these stones mean? Which almost seems unthinkable. What do you mean, what do these stones mean? It's almost as if Joshua said, hey, listen, I know this is crazy to even say, but you need to know that you think these things are unforgettable, but they're not. You think these events are unforgettable. You think these days are unforgettable. You think what we're seeing, what we're witnessing in our world is unforgettable, but it's not. You think you're gonna remember the things that we've learned, the things that we saw, the things that are valuable that we need to carry away from this time. But in the future, your children are gonna ask you, what do these stones mean? And you're gonna need an answer for that. You think you're gonna remember, but the truth is you're gonna need something that can help you remember. You're gonna need a monument you can come back to so that you can remember specifically what God did in your midst in those days. See, this was incredibly purposeful, and this was something they would come back to over and over. But the truth is God deliberately instructed them to do something that they couldn't have done any other way. If he hadn't dried up the Jordan River, there's no way they could have pulled the river rocks. And this group of people, this group of Israelites, this next generation that were the first generation to cross into the promised land on dry ground through God, would go back and they go, you know where those stones came from? Those stones came from the bottom of the Jordan River. Yes, and that represents that we were rescued. We were delivered from God's judgment because we chose to trust in him for our saving. Joshua, our saving, God is salvation. Joshua said, then you can tell them when they ask you this is what you can tell them. You can tell them this is where the Israelites crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the river right before your eyes, and he kept it dry until all were across, just as he did the Red Sea when he dried it up until all of them had crossed over when Moses led his people out of Egypt. He did so that all the nations of the earth might know that the Lord's hand is powerful, and so that you might fear the Lord, your God, forever. Not fear as in like be afraid of or worry about his judgment, but that you in awe would remember what your God did. This memorial was to represent something powerful. First, it was to represent the moment when God's people walked a mile across the Jordan River on dry ground. Second, that they escaped or God passed over judgment on them as they crossed the Jordan River and trusting him and in faith, believing that he would give them the land that they were going to. As their predecessors hadn't, the previous generation hadn't, they sort of escaped that. This represented God's deliverance, but it represented so much more than that. Some of you are twitching because you think I forgot the last checkbox on the sheet here. Some of you love lists and you love to check them off. This one's my favorite one, not because I'm a checkbox person and like to check them off, but for some of you, that's why it's your favorite. But this is why this is my favorite. Do you know what the 10th day of the first month represented? It was on the 10th day of the first month, 40 years to the day prior, that God passed his judgment over the Israelites in Egypt, rescuing them out of slavery. And this was a deliverance, not just of God's people into the promised land. This was God delivering on a 40-year promise, saying that there is no timetable. There is no restrictions on my faithfulness. I can be trusted, and God demonstrated for them in a powerful way that day that he could be trusted to do what he says he's gonna do. and to act on their behalf for their good and for his glory. And this monument would forever resemble that truth. Now, here's the thing we walk away with is if whether you realize it or not, things that are monumental, they need to be memorialized. What's monumental needs to be memorialized. The people of Israel, they would come back to this monument over and over and over. Joshua would bring them back. This was sort of his base camp. Not only would Joshua bring him back, but Elijah would train some of the prophets there. Samuel would bring people back there. He was a prophet to instruct people, the people of God, and to remind them of what he had done for them. And we understand this. We understand memorials. We understand memorializing monumental events in our history. I mean, some of you have visited the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. It's a powerful picture of all the people who sacrificed their lives in that war for freedom, for justice, for what was right. Some of you have visited, you've been lucky enough to visit the USS Arizona, which is a place we'd all like to visit as soon as the quarantine's over, in Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. And you've been there and you realized that a memorial needed to be placed there that represented a significant event that happened in our nation's history. Some of you have been to the 9/11 memorial. This is one that's sort of near and dear to my heart. I actually, when I was in college, I went to college just outside New York City, and I used to go down and sit at the top of World Trade II and study, when I'd study for finals and write papers. And some of you have been to the extraordinary memorial that they've created at 9/11, and here's why. It's because we know, just as the Israelites knew, just as God had instructed, that what's monumental must be memorialized in our lives. Not memorializing an event, it causes the potential of us forgetting. And we're not memorializing what happened in the event, we're memorializing what we learned from the event, how it changed us and how it changed our world. That's what all those memorials do. They help us to never forget. So here's my question. How will you remember? How will you remember what you've experienced in this season? How will you remember the impact of this season on your life? How will you remember what you learned in this season? As crazy as this seems, this season will become forgettable. Not the fact that it happened, you'll always remember that, but the most important parts about it, they'll become forgettable. You see, right now, in this season either has or it will create incredible clarity for us. It'll reveal things that we need to leave behind and things that we need to carry forward. Old habits, old ways of thinking, old belief systems, old dependencies that need to be left behind. And it's revealing a new way, a new path, a new trust, a new way of operating, a new way of experiencing life and the fullness of life that God promised us as we learn to trust him more and more, things that need to be carried forward. But here's what you need to know. The power and the clarity of that, it will fade over time. It doesn't seem like it right now, but it'll fade. So my question for you is, what must be memorialized? As you've sort of gone through this grid, what needs to be left behind and what needs to be carried forward? What are the things that the habits, the patterns, the things that we talked about last week as you've sort of begun to think through this grid, what needs to be left behind and what needs to be carried forward? What are the things in your life that are in these two boxes? And I'll just say this real quick, and some of you are beginning to discover this. Some of the things that have to be left behind, we're realizing that we've developed new ways of living and operating and relating that are actually in the positive things that have come out in this season. And the things that need to be carried forward oftentimes will replace the things that need to be left behind. But if we're not careful, what we'll do is we'll forget. And we'll just go back to the way we were operating before. And instead of carrying the things forward that I believe God's forging in you and in me, the things he's revealing to us, the dependencies, the lack of faith that we have in him in our lives, the things that we've put our trust in other than him, just like the Israelites. The reality is, if we're not careful, we'll just go back and we'll begin experiencing the same unhealth and negativity and the difficulties that we had before, the things that we needed to leave behind. So what must be memorialized, and how will you memorialize it? What does that look like in your life? How will you specifically remember? What sort of memorial or monument will you create to memorialize? Now, there's all sorts of ways to do this. I've seen people doing some really fun things in this season with front porch pictures. I heard of somebody who's actually got their first set of masks from their family, and they put them in a case. They actually framed them and put them in a case so that they would remember this season. But here's the thing, and even as fun as that is, I'm more interested in you building a monument that will help you to remember specifically what you need to leave behind and what you need to carry forward. And I don't know what that is for you. The truth is the stones were what was appropriate for them. It represented each of the 12 tribes and a learning to trust God in a unique way. But there's something in your life. There's an artifact. Maybe it's something that doesn't have a whole lot of value, but it needs to be preserved. It needs to be put in a glass case. It needs to be hung in a prominent place in your house, and it needs to remind you on a regular basis. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to think about this. This is a great activity for you as a family. What's a monument? What's a memorial that you can carry forward? And here's what I want you to do. Once you come up with it, once you create it, once you put it together, I would love for you to take a picture of it and hashtag rebooting life. We would love to share it with our community. I'd love for you to get as creative as you want to. This is an opportunity to inspire other people. So take this seriously. Some of you lead the way in this. Create a monument that represents this season and what you want to carry forward. Something that you want to see on a regular basis, just like this pile of stones that the Israelites built up, so that you will always remember what God taught you, what you learned, what was most important in this season. Not just that the economy and the world and restaurants shut down and everybody was wearing masks and all of that stuff. We won't forget any of that stuff. They're the life lessons, the spiritual lessons, the new character, the new faith that God's forging in us. What will you do? Those monumental things, what will you do to memorialize those? How will they help you remember your monument? How will it help you remember the most important parts of what you've experienced in this season? Now, years ago, there was something that happened for me that was really significant. One year at Thanksgiving dinner, we sat down at Thanksgiving dinner and my grandparents were joining us, Walter and Hazel Thomas, which if there were ever grandparent names, those are grandparent names, Walter and Hazel Thomas. And they joined us for Thanksgiving. And just as we're sitting down and my mom got all the food, it was hot, ready to go. We get in the dining room table, which we never sat in the dining room. We got in the dining room table, eating on the dishes we never ate at, sitting at the table we never sat at, behind the cabinet that had all the dishes on display in before that we now got to touch that we were never allowed to touch before. We're all sitting down for dinner and all the hot food gets on the table and my dad asked this question. He said, hey, before we eat, I want us to all go around. We're gonna pray in just a minute. I want us to all go around, and many of you do this at Thanksgiving, and I want you to share one thing that you're grateful for. One thing that really stands out as something that you're really, really grateful to God for. And my mom sort of cut her eyes at my dad like, the food's getting cold. Are you kidding me? I've been working for hours. And she was okay with it though. She hung in there and we went around the table and we got all the way around. I'll never forget my grandfather, Walter Thomas, by the way. Here's a picture of him as a child. He begins to tell us a story about the Great Depression. And the thing that he says when he answers the question is he says, you know what I'm really, really grateful for? I'm grateful for my bicycle. And we all looked, kids, we were young kids at the time. We looked at each other like, your bicycle? Grandpa, can you even ride a bicycle anymore? You're grateful for your bicycle? He's like, yeah, I'm grateful for my bicycle. During the Great Depression, he began to explain the difficulty of that season and how they had no money and his parents didn't have jobs and his grandparents didn't have jobs. They all lived in a house together. In fact, this was his grandmother, Cornelius. This is his younger brother, my Uncle Paul, my Aunt Ruthie, and they were all living in a house together, extended family, because they couldn't afford to live on their own. Several of them lost their homes, and they had no money, and they didn't know even many days where their next meal was gonna come from. And at one point, by some miracle in the community, in their little neighborhood, a bunch of families came together, and they pulled together, and they bought a bicycle, not for my grandfather, but for the neighborhood. And all the kids shared a single bicycle. And they would ride this bicycle, and he remembers the joy it provided for them and the hope it provided for them in that season. And as he told the story to us, he sat at the end of the table, tears running down his eyes, and none of us cared about the hot food anymore, not even my mom. As he told us this story, he got to the end of the story. He said, long after the Great Depression was over, and long after we could afford bicycles and we bought new bicycles, he said, I kept that bicycle. I kept that bicycle for years and years and years. And he said this, he said, I'll never forget this. He said, to this day, that bicycle reminds me to be grateful for the food on this table. That bicycle was a memorial. It was a monument, much like the stones that stood at Gilgal, not any significant place, just where they camped that night. And that's why the Israelites came back to it over and over and over. Because if we're not careful, we'll forget. If we're not careful, we'll leave behind things that we need to carry forward, and we'll carry forward things that we need to leave behind. May you never forget this season. May you never forget the lessons you're learning. May you never forget what you've experienced, what we've witnessed, and what God is stirring in your heart. May you not miss the moment. As God shows up and as he gives direction, as he gives provision, and as he leads all of us towards the greater life, the more fruitful life, the promised life and promised land that he's leading us toward. See, what's monumental, it's got to be memorialized. My questions for you is these two questions. What must be memorialized, and how will you memorialize it? You need to do this. This is important. I don't want you to forget what God is doing in this season and in your life. There's incredible power in creating memorials. And if you'll take the time to do it, if you'll take the time to go through the work, it is to discover the important things that God wants you to carry forward out of the season. And there are things. God is speaking, he's working, he's leading. And if you'll pay attention, he has things that he wants you to memorialize so that you'll carry them forward for your good and for his glory. Let me pray for you. God, thank you for this preserved story and the extraordinary symbolism in it and the patterns and the typologies that we can learn from. God, I pray for somebody who's watching today, and some of the things that they're learning, some of the things that they've even discovered in these weeks as they're considering rebooting life and their own personal life, and some people that are even taking this soberingly serious. Some of those things they haven't even spoken out loud about. They haven't been able to reveal the things that they've gained clarity on. I just pray that you'd give them great wisdom to not try to bury those things, to not try to hide those things, but to bring those things into the light, to continue to allow you to work in their lives, and that you would reveal with incredible clarity what you want to teach us, each individually, and what you want to teach us corporately in this season. And that we would appropriately memorialize these things so that one day when our kids, our grandkids, when the next generation, when they see something hanging on our wall, or they see something we left behind, or they see something we passed down, they'll ask the question, what is this? And it will be a story of your faithfulness, of your nearness, of your participation, of your leading, of your guiding, of your provision and your direction in our lives. And I pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Well, thanks so much for being here with us again this week for Rebooting Life, part 2. Just before you leave, I have a really important message for all of our small group leaders, which I just want to applaud in front of all of you. I want you to know how proud I am of all of our small group leaders. The truth is even if we couldn't do this, if the internet went out and we couldn't do this, the church would keep going forward because of our small group leaders. Many of you are leading every week gatherings online with people, with each other. You're staying connected. You're making phone calls. You're making sure people in your group are cared for. before, and I just want to say thank you to all of you. Tomorrow night, we're having a Zoom call for all of our small group leaders. So if you lead a small group, an adult small group of any kind, tomorrow night at 8:30, I have some important things I want to share with you, some important information, and Ben's going to be leading that call. Ben leads all of our adult small groups. So if you'll check your email, all the information is there for how you can jump onto that call tomorrow night. It's at 8:30. Again, anybody who's leading any adult small group of any kind in our church, I'd love for you to jump on. If you don't have the information, just email us at info@missionaz.org, info@missionaz.org, and just say, hey, I need the link for the small group leader gathering, and we'll make sure we get that to you. I hope to see you there tomorrow night. If you're not a small group leader, I hope to see you Tuesday night. We're continuing our nights of prayer and worship, and we got another exciting night this Tuesday night. I'm really excited about it, and I hope you'll join us for that. Until then, I hope you have a great and safe start to your week. Thank you so much for being with us. God bless.